I am here at the pool with my co-hosts, Graciela Asher. She is a Reiki master and ceremonialist, among many other things. And Heather Carlucci is a psychic medium and medical intuitive, among many other things. And I'm an editor and fitful writer, designer, storyteller, performer, blah, 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 blah. This is our third psychic pool party. Welcome.
Yay.
In this fantasy pool party, no one gets sunburned or sucks chlorine up their nose. The kids are fine. So we're going to spend this perfect poolside hour getting to know each other and our special guest a bit better. Before we bring on our guest though, hi, how are you all?
Great, we're good.
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 Actually, I started my my morning with a reading, and she's here. So everyone say hi to Karen.
Oh, hi, Karen. Welcome. Oh, and my friend Amelia's here. Hi, Amelia.
Yeah.
So I decided that in honor of our guest today, that I would change pools and go to something larger. And so I chose the Atlantic Ocean. I feel like there's no chlorine in the Atlantic Ocean. You know, there's no chemicals. It's more natural. I don't know. Somehow it felt more in line.
You know, and you found an open beach right there.
I did. I found one. Yeah, I know. It's amazing. I had to run some vagrants off behind me, but yeah, they were threatened. They were very threatened by my presence, and they moved. Okay, so I'm going to bring on our special guest. Rooted in, while I'm doing this, Heather, will you bring him on?
Yes, of course.
Great. Sorry. This is the smooth part of our show. Rooted in words, Ty Defoe is a shapeshifter of artistic expression, bringing stories to life. I just read that, Ty, off your website. So if there's more to be said, then we'll find that out as we move along.
Wow.
It's cool.
I love that.
I got the memo about the pool, so it's a flower pool.
It is a flower pool. It's gorgeous. I love that you spent all that time laying that mosaic out for us.
Yes.
You know, we're accepting of all pools here, so.
Okay, good. I like brought the flower game. I'm like, pool flowers.
Yes, it works.
Exactly. For those of you joining us for the first time, we being Heather and Graciela and I, spent our first episode investigating the collective noun light worker. And we decided that the collective noun is basically means someone who works with energy. And based on that, not only does that fit Heather and Graciela, but it also includes me as my work, not recently, but my experience as a performer in the theater. So I think I want to ask my first question, since we're at the beginning of introductions. How does that descriptor fit with you, Ty?
What was the question? I got mesmerized by your palm tree in the back of the ocean. I like totally transcended to the location of your background.
I'm so thrilled, and yeah. Oh, so a light worker. If the phrase like if the word light worker means someone who works with energy, how does that fit with you?
Yeah, I think, you know, when I think about light, I think about joy.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I think oftentimes, you know, certain subject matters like joy request from English language as something in particular. So I think like joy meaning that you have to be happy all the time, and that necessarily isn't the case, but to find joy is to find like expansive depth in doing and giving for others. So that's what I sort of am thinking about when I'm reminded of light and, you know, healing work and things to be overturned. You know, like I brought the flower game today. It's like the flowers, they experience light and they also experience death. And I feel like that's also something that's part of that light work. It's that light in the darkness.
Love that. I love that. So thank you. That's lovely. I think that we can probably dig into that a little deeper from all of our standpoints. I have an impulse to start today with a quick story, if you'll indulge me, because I'll just launch into it. As somebody who grew up in rural Arkansas, I didn't grow up in a religious household. This is remarkable because my hometown had more churches than grocery stores, gas stations, and schools combined.
Wow.
That's still true today. So it was for me as a young Gaelic who hadn't quite identified as such. It was a very uncomfortable addition to the host of uncomfortable feelings that I had at that time, to also be in a family that that had recognized no formal religion. And many years later, as I was out behind our house, digging in the garden one beautiful sunny Sunday morning with my mother and my father and my sister, I broached the question, because we always chatted while we planted. I said, why don't we go to church? Why don't we have a religion? And without missing a beat, my father said, this is our religion. This is what we do. This is spiritual for us. And if you need something more than that, if you need to investigate formal religion, we definitely encourage you to do so. We encourage you to sample them all. And of course, my selection in Dardanelle, Arkansas was basically a dazzling array of Baptist. First Baptist, Second Baptist, Primitive Baptist, I mean, you name it, it was Baptist anything.
Primitive Baptist.
Yeah,
Wow.
Primitive Baptist, sit with that.
There we go.
So I actually gravitated to the more exotic place of worship, which was Catholic. And the reason that I did that was not only because it was exotic, but also my two best friends, a brother and sister, were Catholic. And so it was easy for me to go there. And I went with them a handful of times. My experience there was that it was the first place I ever made the connection, where I ever observed the theatricality of ceremony, and where I connected theater with ritual. And this was before my formal theater studies. It wasn't until after I went to college that I studied more formally, and then understood more intellectually and on a more deeper level, exactly what that is. And so for me in college, my first and only church has ever been theater. It is the sacred place of service, of connection, of community. And I mentioned this story because I feel like this provides maybe my only intersection for commonality with Ty, and perhaps to a degree also Graciela. So I'd like to just start there. And Ty, talk to me about what that brings up for you. Oh.
Listening to this story and in thinking about that, you know, in terms of, and well, one, thank you for sharing. I think that's so amazing to think about, because there's so many, you know, negative connotations around a Baptist. I don't even know too much about all the sectors like Primitive Baptist and what that is exactly.
Yeah, let me say, I said Baptist, but I mean no judgment there. My very best friends to this day are both Primitive Baptist and were raised in that church. So I've been there too.
I mean, and that's exactly what I heard from your voice, is like this sort of lack of judgment, but a place that you could go to as you were, you know, in this environment. So I think there's something to be said about, you know, learning all that you can. And that's something that I have definitely focused on, to expand your highest human potential. And I feel you know, very connected to ritual in that way as well. And, you know, I think where I grew up in the intersections of, I guess, performance and theater and ritual in northern Wisconsin, definitely I was like, wow, this is, you know, at the very root and center of everything. The like I felt like it was like a theater performance, but something that was bringing light to truth, like shedding a light on a type of truth. And, you know, in those ways, it was one, developing relationships with others, right? Which I think is completely spiritual in a sense, because it's not focusing on a trend, something that's transactional, like what can I get from you, but it's more what can I give to you. And so I was always totally drawn to that, in ceremonies that I, you know, sort of grew up in. And they're, you know, and thinking about that, there's like a ceremony for everything, for names, for rites of passage, for eating food, for people dying, for someone crying, for someone's first love. Like it's just like, like how many ceremonies are there? There are so many of them. But within that, right? So then you can see how many microcosms of like a type of theater of communing together there would be. So yeah, that's definitely how I relate to, you know, those words and everything about, and stories I think are so important, because I feel like the story of journey, origin stories are totally important, because I feel like they are our historical documents. And you flash forward to 2020, a time where now truth is being overturned in this way, or a light is being shed on it. We're able to look at a value system as a larger community of people. So it's almost like meta in ways. And also interesting, this image that came to me today, these flowers, the idea about the expansion and growth of something. And almost there's this really amazing artist, Morrissey from Canada, that has X-ray art and has like objects within objects within objects, just like in Russia, you know, those dolls with the doll and the doll and the doll. But this guy, he has you know, animals within animals within other animals within plant life, and it goes from the very microscopic to the very large and expansive. And I'm always also drawn to that, because that's the very thing that I experience and see within ceremony. And oftentimes when the cross section of truth happens in just, you know, contemporary performance, that's often what I feel when I leave. I feel connected. I feel like there's a type of mission, a call to action. I feel transcendent. So just riffing.
I'd like to jump into that a second, because there's something about what you said about how, you know, you come from a culture where like basically anything happens and there's a ceremony for it. But, and I think that I did not grow up with any sort of religious whatever. I had to sort of go with what I was drawn to. But that being said, I will say something that comes up really palpably in the last year when I do my medical work is how important it is that we have people, others, who bear witness to our own lives. And I think that so much of what ceremony is, of course, you know, in the more masses, we've lost that. But when we live more with the people that mean something to us, right? And this is also like friends who are family and how important that is. But and what is ceremony? Like people show up for stuff so we can bear witness to it. And it affects us medically. Like having that moment and having that go on. Actually, one time in particular, it really struck me. It struck me physically. Ty, you came to my daughter's school to teach and perform. And it's the only, and there were, in that class in particular, there were 4 children who were obviously not in a class that is really designed for them, right? We, you know, were challenged in some way. I wouldn't want to say challenged, but we don't support that. But what was really amazing is that I had never seen them still before that one day. And it wasn't just because somebody was performing, because I had been on trips with these children before, you know, they were great, but I think they really understood intent of just showing up and being able to witness something that has the intent that they needed. And to me, that right there was like the purpose of ceremony. It actually changed the way I thought about the word ceremony for a long time. Because I think ceremony always goes to pomp, and we got to be careful of that one.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's like so powerful. And also your witnessing of that to carry that information forward, I feel like is so beautiful, and also similar to that X-ray art. It's like the witnessing upon witnessing upon witnessing,
Yeah.
upon more witnessing. And when I think about design and shape, I think about concentric circles that are rippling out. So yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Show done.
Thank you so much.
That was powerful right there.
Safe drive home.
We dived into the deep end, the pool.
It got deep fast.
It got deep fast.
I love that. Well, and speaking of deep, I mean, I don't know if this is going to crack open any further conversation or not, but I feel like this conversation for me is really poignant and ties back into the theater world for me is that all of our places of worship are closed right at the moment.
That's right.
Including the theater, which is my place of worship. And worship is a funny word to use in that sense, but it is my place where I connect with the thing that is bigger than me. And that's bigger than the audience, I should add. So I have no idea if that's leading anywhere, just a comment that occurred to me as we move forward.
Well, it brings something up that I was just thinking of, because, and both Ty and Graciela, you both, I think, experience this, especially because you're not just doing ceremony and ceremonies in places that are your people, right? You know, and by people, I just mean anybody who, you know, basically already loves you, right? In the immediate, but you step into spaces that are very different at every time. Can you guys talk about how different that is, and also not just what you think other people react to, but how it's different in your own experience? Because I think people have to remember that when we as people walk into another space to give something, it is an experience for us as well.
Definitely. Well, for me, what's coming up is about what you were saying, Ty, about ceremony being everywhere. For me, so I kind of bring, I literally kind of bring ceremony with everything that I do. So I am also a face painter and artist. And I feel like when, particularly, this is what's coming up for me, is when I go and face paint people, and I don't normally have like a diagram of, okay, you can pick this or pick that. It's all intuitive. And I read people's energy before I do that. Like I read their chakras, their energy fields, all of that. And then that is when I paint, and I help guide them in setting an intention. And this is very new for a lot of people. So when you're saying, Heather, like, yeah, this isn't a place, they're just like, wait, this lady's about to touch my face and she's like reading my energies, and like, what is all this? And it's really a beautiful moment, like you all are saying, about this observing and being observed. And it's a beautiful exchange of energy in inviting people to set that intention. Because for me, one of the main things that makes ceremony is setting that intention. There's so many different ways of, doing whatever you're going to do, and, different herbs, different things, different gestures, but it's all about setting that intention. And so for me, and it also speaks to to us, because people ask me all the time, well, are you a bruja? Like, are you, what are you doing? And I'm just like, like, they're like, well, do you work with magic? And I'm like, well, we are magic. Like, magic is happening every moment. So guess what? You're a bruja too, or a bruja or whatever. And it's just like, so the ceremony aspect of it is like very intimate, yet it's very inter-exchanging, and people ask me after I paint them, well, how did you know? Like, where did this come from? Like, because everybody always looks different. And it's just like, okay, well, it's not me. Like, this is an inter-exchange of energies that I'm just channeling, and it's coming out and honoring what is your energy that you hold, and not just you, but the ancestors that you walk with. So in this painting, sometimes I can bring out, like, there was this one painting that's coming to mind where it looked very like Asian architecture-ish, if that makes any sense. And this sister was like a woman of African descent. And I asked her, I was just like, I have a feeling that, this and this is coming up. And she's like, wow. She's like, I just did my DNA. And it showed that she had no idea. She had 30% Japanese in her lineage. So they were always like, and they wanted to be known. And now it was like they were coming forward and being like, we're here. Like, and so when in ceremony, I feel that I'm not just connecting with the person in front of me. I'm connecting with all of the spirits and ancestors that they walk with. And they're connecting with all my ancestors and my spirits that I walk with. So it's this beautiful connection with intention to bring forward their highest good, or whatever that intention is, together. So for me, that's how I feel. Yeah.
Thank you.
Ooh. Dang.
Yeah. So here I have something I want to jump on, because Graciela just got real specific, and I do want to get specific about ceremony. Beyond my little theater beyond my theater background, my only understanding of ceremonies are deeply European Caucasian. I understand. I have a certain understanding of wedding ceremony and how that European white idea of what that is, of the ceremony around death and burial. Ty, can you talk about the differences between more indigenous and native ceremonies as compared to the prevalent in this country right now, European aspect of things?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about it. And I think, there are some interesting, I guess, contemporary things about this, well, one, a contemporary type of culture that we live in, and sort of also want to say too, with, I guess, this country or America, all those things being constructs that to take things away from people and people's identity, whether one is an indigenous or whether one is like African or even, white European, like just chiseling down to the specificity, I think. And I think that's like totally important, even for folks that identify as being white, about, okay, where is the land at which your ancestors are sort of occupying, versus like where you are from, as the years and decades come on, versus like, where is your like physical DNA body from? Where is your heart from? And I feel like all of those things play into creating a type of ritual or ceremony for something like death. And even to be more specific, I think that boils down to, of the 350,000 nations that were once here, and now only, like so many that are federally recognized, because the language is being spoken now and songs are only remembered. You think about then how many different nations had different ways of, exemplifying like death and death ritual. And now today, you can only find it through region, which is the ecological region, like the plateau, the plains, the woodland nations up in Alaska or even Hawaii. And so it's like, so the whole idea with the death ritual too, then depending on the nation, can also incorporate family, for native indigenous folks. And then some of those families have specific clans. So for example, I am Anishinaabe from the north on my father's side, and no one's perfect. I'm also Haudenosaunee, or Six Nations on my mom's side. So two totally different nations with two totally different language speaking groups and songs. One is led by the matriarch, by the women, and so we answer to our clan mothers and folks, and there's like very huge protocol. Well, on my father's side, it's a lot of the masculine energy that is sort of holding some of the songs, and even that has changed because of gender contemporary dynamics, which is interesting too. So in terms of the question about death, there are ways of doing, as one calls it, to go back home. Like when you pass to the other side, they say, oh, we have to prepare things because we have to send this spirit back home. They're going home. And what are the things that you do to prepare an individual time, a snapshot in time that you spent time with them in their physical life here to go home? One would be food. You have to, right? Food is like our number one essential thing to live, making sure that that spirit is fed. So there's large feasts oftentimes, and the ones that I've been to, and everyone's very different in ways, but food, putting out a spirit plate, and meaning that people eat food and nourish themselves. And even when that food is prepared, that person totally being in good thought or the good mind, as we say in Haudenosaunee, like it's, putting good energy into that food, and probably like food sovereignty goes around that, right? Of like making sure it's like fresh food, and, you're not angry when you're chopping those onions, right? You're like thinking these good thoughts to feed all of the people that are coming to support a spirit crossing to the other side, because that food is also for the spirit. So when that's done, you get a little plate, you put all kinds of food on it from the feast, like everything that you can imagine in that person's favorite food, whether it's something like chocolates or strawberry shortcake. You do everything in your like self here to get that food put on the plate, and then you take it outside, you take it to the earth or to the land in some kind of way, because in regards to people, we are constantly centering ourselves as human beings, but yet we are the youngest species on the planet, right? Like these trees, these rocks, like they have been here for, we can't even calculate how long they have been here. So the idea about putting that played out by the spirits that know what home is already and have, right, cycled back to this waking world, is really important, so that the nutrients and vitamins, even if like a squirrel comes and starts messing with the plate and tearing it up and making a home out of it, that is recycling things back to the earth, which is so important. And I'm sure this is found in many, cultures across the globe and things, this idea of feeding spirit or feeding soul. And that's important. One other essential thing I think too in the, the ceremony about returning home is water, right? Water's that other, like we cannot live without water. It is like we are made of water. Water, we clean ourselves, and water is those things also in many rituals and ceremonies. You're like, there's water there. It's comforting, yet it's fluid and nimble, and you can use it to pivot and do many things, cleansings with it. Water is seen as a magnifying glass to see the multiple worlds, as it relates to this physical world that we can see, and others, such as some of you folks here, can see something else. So water is totally essential with seeing in that specific death ritual crossing over to home ceremony. Oftentimes there's songs which, you know, are really important, singing folks' favorite songs, you know, whether that's getting on the old guitar and jamming something out, some John Prime, or getting on a drum, right? So I'm sort of noting these both contemporary and sort of, you know, traditional things that are done, because the idea about tapping into this heartbeat, which is the first music or rhythm that you hear when you are a small child, a spirit born into this world, when you are, you know, how you got made was from the burning passion of things to create that heartbeat of life. And that heartbeat is the very thing that connects all people around the world, regardless of like age, race, gender, sexuality, that everyone also has. So, right, I'm naming a lot of these universal things that are really important, but they have a weight in this death ceremony, which also makes me feel about celebration, right? Like it's, you know, these words that I'm using are so impassioned because they are celebrating this person going home. Like, what a beautiful thing to go home. Like, you know, those days when you have like such a hard work day and you're like, I just want to go home and relax. Like, what? That's what you're doing to prepare the spirit to go home. And that's sort of what I have, you know, witnessed. Something really specific that I've noticed, you know, in ceremonies that I've been to is the use of like feathers. Ooh, I got mine right here. Um, and like calling upon our, you know, brothers and sisters and relatives of our four-legged or winged creatures. You know, because we are only human, we need the spiritual essence or power of these other entities to sort of remind us that we are not the end all be all, that we cannot do it alone. And these feathers are sort of, you know, like reminders of that. And so also these feathers, because our hands pick up so many different things, these feathers, because there's a type of coating on it that an elder once told me, that can either like wash off, you know, like they don't need to like go and wash their hands, but there's a coating on it where it just like falls off of the feather, just like so. So it's like almost like a spiritual cleansing too, like giving a spiritual shower. You know, let some good soap using that feather to like wipe off anything that has been picked up, you know, to send someone back home.
Yeah, I have, wow, there's a lot to unpack there. Thank you for all of
Yeah.
yeah, my first thought is death rituals for my people involve Velveeta-based casseroles and booze. So if that doesn't tell you that maybe we got some work to do.
Did you say and boobs?
Booze.
Oh, booze. I think said boobs.
No, well, perhaps.
It's southern booze or moonshine or something
Right.
like that.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, yes. We're gonna, I just want to let our audience know we're gonna take some questions. So if you've got questions, prepare for that. Oh, and look,
There's people on.
Mark is right
Wow.
there, quick on the draw. There's a copy and paste going on there. I can sense it.
Feels close, doesn't it?
I'm gonna read this. It says, I hear what Graciela said about intention. That said, I've often thought that anything humanity has put belief or energy into by many over a long period of time, that thing now has more energy and thus more power than, say, something, a ritual, I create and set intention to in that moment. Does a ritual that is well established have more power readily available for me to tap into than, say, something I come up with that is meaningful, just me, and practiced by me?
Yeah, I would say that definitely that is whatever I feel, that whatever intention that one thinks is kind of whatever your belief is, that especially if it's supercharged and passionate, like this person's saying, that has so much power. And when we amplify that by all these other processes, like Ty was saying, with feathers and food and singing and song, and then in ritual, it with other people sharing that same intention, in Ty's example of sending a spirit home, that it just like vibrates that even louder, because everybody, not just you, and you can do it on your own. Like I do ritual, and like that's what I was saying, or my intention was to say that ceremony is happening all the time, because for me, your intention, what you're thinking, what you're speaking, we're making spells in every moment. We're creating magic, because like Ty said too, with the water, we are created, you know, a huge portion of our bodies are made up of water. Water is a divine intelligence. Water is listening to every thought, every action that we're that we're doing. It is so divine. We don't even understand it. And I don't even necessarily want to, you know, it's just, and so, but knowing, I do have a knowing that it is so divine and intelligent, that it hears what we're thinking. So when we do, even individually, to answer your question, have that intention, it is definitely going forward. And so that can mean our negative thoughts or our positive thoughts. It doesn't matter what your intention is. If it's something that you are constantly thinking and focusing on, that is reverberating, and the universe is listening and responding. And even if we believe sometimes that we're like, I hate this, but I want this, but I hate this, but I want this. But the universe doesn't speak in understanding what we don't want. It understands and speaks in what we're focusing our energy on. So if we're focusing in a sake of manifesting or intention with a ritual, we have to make sure that our words are exactly in the now and in the positive affirmation of what we are trying to manifest, and that intention, and releasing what we don't want and don't even have that come into our vocabulary or our existence, especially in the state of ceremony and ritual.
Yeah, that's so good. And just to am I on mute? Oh no, I'm not on mute. Yeah, intentionality is so important, and being specific is so important. There's a great joke from a Lily Tomlin play that I can't quote right off the top of my head, but from my own perspective, it goes something like this. When I decided what I wanted to do for a living, I should have been more specific, which is that when I was very young and in Arkansas, I was like, one day I want to work on Broadway. And then I moved to New York, and my first job was in a Broadway theater cleaning the urinals. So specific language is very, very important. The universe listened and gave me work on Broadway. It was not what I had in mind.
Also, I'd like to also answer the other part of this, is that if you come up with something that is a ritual for your own, you have to remember, just because it hasn't been, or you know it has not been done before, or feel it hasn't been done before, there's a reason why you thought of it. It was that thought process was given to you, and it doesn't matter. So if somebody's doing a ritual and they teach it to you and it resonates, as long as it resonates, that's the only thing that matters. You know, because some people grow up in a culture and in a religion, and they get to a certain age and they realize, I've never felt good about this. And some people are born into a culture and a religion that will always work for them for whatever reason, even if it has nothing, because even if you do not know that something else exists, which many people did not know and do not know to this day, you know, if it doesn't work for you, there's still something inside of you that you can feel it in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. So it doesn't really matter what has more power or doesn't, has only to do with you and how you feel about it.
Yes, That is so true. And I just want to speak about a personal experience where that resonates. So I grew up in temple, in a Jewish temple. I grew up in a Jewish household. I was adopted. And I was born in Colombia, but I was raised by a Jewish family in Long Island. And one of the things that we would do, and it didn't resonate with me, and my family was upset about, but was during weddings that people would just like break this glass and stomp on the glass, and they were like, this is what we do. And you know, and then when my brother got married, everybody's, you know, stomping on the glass and breaking the glass, and I was just like, like it just, you know, it just didn't resonate with me for whatever reason. Didn't even mean that there was anything wrong with it. I didn't tell them that they couldn't do that, obviously, but it didn't resonate with me. And then for me later, I like, now I have like tapped into all these other rituals that I never grew up in. I didn't grow up doing anything that I do now, you know, but it was like, it's something in me. There is something, whether it's me, whether it's my ancestors, where whatever it is that really connects with me to the earth, to honoring the directions and the elements. And I did not grow up that way at all. But yes, so just to reverberate what you're saying, that's completely true for me, definitely.
And the reasons why things reverberate with us are a million different things. We do have to be careful, though, if it's not forced upon us or thought about differently or anything like that, because we need to be careful of things. But quite honestly, the power that something has for you personally is where it sits.
Yeah, I think who was it? Some writer named William Shakespeare.
Never heard of him.
Did you hear him?
No idea.
I'm gonna Google him. Can I Google him?
Didn't he say, know thyself? And also Bruce Lee, and like you know, like so many folks like Roberta Flack, like know thyself. And I literally feel like when you know thyself, like what you all were saying, I was like, yes, you can really feel like the connection towards a type of ritual or towards a type of intention. It's you know, it's the synergy between you and the other thing, whatever it is, you know.
Yeah.
So I was kind of thinking about that.
Yeah. Well, and yes, and to paraphrase, know thyself. You know, we can go to another great guru who's basically saying the same thing. If you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love somebody else? Is deep.
Yeah.
It's not just a catchphrase. It's
Yeah.
really, it's important.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I just also want to add, as far as, because I just think this is important, that to know yourself and to find, like what Heather was saying, what resonates, but then also to pay reverence to whatever ritual or culture that has come from. So, you know, to honor where that source is that you're, you know, channeling or getting that download from, I think it's also very important.
Agree, totally agree. Yeah, I wasn't raised in a theater family either. And yet that was the ritual that resonated with me. It did not with my sister. She found a different path. And I find that to be very interesting because we grew up, you know, there's only 4 years difference between us. We grew up in virtually the same situation, the same household, and found two different paths, both of which do not cause harm to others. That's the only piece of this. Bye, Amelia. Amelia's leaving us.
Bye, Amelia. Thank you for coming to the pool.
Yeah, that's the only thing I want to say is I agree with what Heather was just saying about finding your way into the ritual and what resonates with you. I just want to add to that, as long as it doesn't hurt other people.
Yeah, well, yeah. And find out also why that, you know, there's a million ways, and find out why that resonates with you. Find out what you know what, because a lot of people just go blindly into it because what's supposed to be spiritual. And when I first started doing this work, and a lot of the people who do my work really resonate on a very specific ceremonies, things that we're familiar with. And for me, not only I didn't feel for me that I was being true to myself if I did these practices that other people did, just because I was supposed to. And my whole life, I've always sort of looked towards religion. I'm both well, I'm Italian and Jewish, so Catholic-ish, Jewish-ish. And I have to sort of, one does not resonate with me at all, and one very much does resonate. But when I find myself in that situation, in synagogue and stuff like that, the culture in which surrounds it now does not resonate with me. So me, myself, I realize that there's more, we have to remember there's more to us than just living on this earth right now. And why that resonates, I do not know. And I even looked into sort of the witches of Italy, which go way, way back. And like, I dig it, but I still don't feel I don't feel the gut, right? I don't feel that thing that I'm like, okay, it is part of me. And also, as we go through life, there are different times in our lifetimes that we're here that we are supposed to dip into different things. It's okay if and some people full on go from religion to religion, and bless their hearts, I find that exhausting. but and it is in the big picture, sort of like, how are we learning these things? Why are we learning these things? And we don't need to ever walk into them being driven by ego, because that's one of our biggest mistakes. Especially as I sit here presenting middle-aged white woman, I'm always aware of that because that's what it is. But like, we have to really be careful about not only how we feel comfortable, but who is embracing us, because we forget that. Because when we put ourselves in a situation where other people aren't embracing us, we end up starved.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
Wow.
If anyone has any other questions for us, please let us know.
No, I was there. My mind was like, and I was like, yes.
End up on such a low note, but
no, that's okay. That's all right. And we're not quite at the end yet. This is really more observational than it is leading to a question, perhaps. But the other thing I found really interesting is is how many people I've talked to who right now, now that here in New York, we're like, what, week 6? We're at the end of week 6 of being in lockdown, and how like in the absence of being able to commune, specifically in places of worship and the theater, how quickly and enthusiastically, determinedly, people gravitated toward any form of connection. It was like no time at all. And I mean, and here I am, I'm very much in the same boat. 6 weeks ago, I was doing very little on Zoom, and now I'm hosting 2 shows, completely different shows. It's like I can't get enough. And I don't love the digital platform. I don't love staring at my computer all day. I don't love Zoom specifically, but I'm so grateful for anything. And it's so strange. If I were designing a place of worship, it would not look like this. However, I'm thrilled for the congregants who I've been blessed to sit here with. If I can use that blessed word, that would give me problems.
For now, we'll take it. How about that?
Take it.
So before we close the book on ceremony and ritual, is there anything else that we've not covered?
I guess I was thinking about something that someone mentioned here, to talk a little bit about exchange, which I think is, reciprocal to, because right, when you think about how many religions, how many rituals, how many practices, how many people there are, I was just curious about all of your thoughts about that as it relates to exchange and what that means and is, and your philosophies behind that, because I think that's something that's it's very specific and interesting as it relates to something. These things and these practices are so special, right, to each person and whoever they are, which I think is important.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting. I think Graciela was sort of touching on that a little bit when she was talking about the intimacy of certain rituals specific to her. The face painting thing being so intimate. Obviously, that's a very intimate thing. I'm guessing you're not painting multiple faces at the same time. You're probably just focused on generally one. You may be ambidextrous, and I'm sure that you are far more gifted than I am. But I'm just guessing. Do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So yeah, I definitely am. I'm trying to think if I ever painted two people when no. Yeah, no, it's just mostly one
Yeah.
person.
So talk about the exchange of energy.
Yes, and the exchange of energy is really it's something that you can't really, it's not a tangible thing necessarily for me at least, but it's definitely I as somebody going into someone's very personal space, it's also being aware of your own energy. And like the brother Ty before was saying, that they are with when they have to make sure when they're preparing the food where they are at mind frame is what they're thinking about, to make sure that that energy doesn't get transferred in a negative space into the food. I think the same about my paint. I actually say prayers over my paint. I charge my paint. I put oil on my paint. I sage my paint because I want to make sure that that paint, even in transferring from one place to the other, one person to the other, doesn't pick up any energy, that they're making sure that it's completely them, their own experience. And with the paint that I use specifically is all plant-based. So there's no chemicals or anything like that in the paint that I use, to make sure that also it's they're getting the essence of the plants, of the oils, of the natural stuff that is also a part of that energy exchange that goes into helping create that space. And I also speak to those the plants in the paints to ask them, because I do believe that they respond just like the water inside our bodies. There is an intelligence of plants as well. Like you were saying, Ty, that the plants have been here. I call them plant ancestors because like we honor our ancestors, our plants have been here way before us, and they're so divinely intelligent. And so that energy exchange, inviting them in making sure I'm super cleansed, making sure that I'm clear and a pure channel to not have any of my stuff come forward onto them. Like to be as empty as possible is really, really important. And then when they're, making their intention for whatever it is, usually, I don't know, not usually, it always changes, but I just, become the channel and just let that energy flow through me. And I reflect back to them their personal intention to make sure that we are all divine reflections of each other. So I'm just mirroring their reflection back to them. So it really gets, I guess, transferred in the highest vibrational way.
Yeah. I've got something that ties right into that, Graciela, and this came up for me immediately when you mentioned this, Ty, which is I'll try to make a quick story. I'm not known for quick stories. I'm known for very long stories. So I'm going to edit as I go. I should be able to do this.
Don't edit. Don't censor yourself. Just let it out.
My experience with theater is much like a lot of my friends and family's experience with religion has been, which is that we kind of drift in and out, depending on what's going on in our lives, right? Sometimes it's super important to us and we're there a lot, and sometimes we're not there so much. And the thing that I have found is that whenever I go for long periods of time, when I'm not connected to performing specifically, that there's a certain deprivation within me. And the deprivation, it's taken me years to figure out, is really just the connection and the exchange of energy. And to that point comes this story. One of these times I was very, very involved in my work at the time, my job. And my partner of almost 18 years and I separated. I went through a period of depression. And during that period of depression, I was very withdrawn and not connecting with people much at all. Out of the blue, towards the end of the depression part, I was just starting to sort of come out of it. Toward the end of that, a good friend of mine who passed a couple of years ago, an artist by the name of Robert Richards, had inherited from a friend of his who had passed a cigar box full of poems. And the person who wrote these poems would probably not have called himself a poet. He was a male escort and a porn star who died from AIDS in the late 80s. And as he was dying, no one was visiting him at the time. He was, there was still so much not known that very few people were visiting him at the time. He had no immediate family. And Robert was one of the few people with whom he had a deep connection and who was brave enough to go in and check on him. And on his last visit with this man, whose name was Roy, Roy said to Robert, "I'm not afraid to die. I know that it's coming. My only fear is that no one will remember that." He handed Robert the box and he said, "Will you just see that something happens with this?
Wow.
Please make something of this." And Robert was so moved by it and so devastated that he put this box on a shelf and it sat there for years. And every day he'd walk past it and see it and go and have this pang of guilt about oh God, I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing anything. What am I going to do? And suddenly one day he had the idea, since he'd never read the poems, he had no idea about the quality of what was in there. He decided that he would get a couple of friends with him. They would just sit there and read through them, sift through them, sort of make some choices and groupings of things that felt like they were of the same ilk, and just put it up on a stage as a reading. That's what he felt and compelled to do. They were all written in the first person. They were all written about New York in the 80s. And they very much capture that. The quality of the poems are uneven, as you might expect from an amateur poet. However, he assembled a group of people, a group of men, young men, younger than Roy, put it that way, to come together, and he rented a Dixon place for an evening, and he asked these men to come up and participate. And Robert, not really being not a director and not really a producer, didn't have a lot of imagination. He just wanted, about how this would be staged and what this theatrical event would be like. So it was just going to be a straight up reading. And he asked me. Now he knew that I had a background as a performer, but actually the way that we met was not in a theater context. So he didn't really know a lot about me, and I was startled to be asked to be one of these readers. And because it was Robert, I always said yes to Robert. Whatever he asked, I just said yes, and I never regretted it. So I said yes, even though I was feeling awful at this time, at this period in my life, and very withdrawn and very self-conscious. I said yes. We only did 2 read-throughs. They were only individual. I never read with any of the other people because the poems were not dialogue. They were standalone pieces. And when we showed up at Dixon Place that night to do the performance, there was no set. It's just the bare room. There was no light plot, but there was one follow spot. There was a microphone down center, and we all stood in a line upstage, so we were fully visible the entire time. We were just as lit as any place else except for the microphone. There was no curtain, there was no introduction, there was really nothing. It was just like, go. And we all had our scripts in front of us. And I remember not knowing any of the boys that I was on stage with at all. We had no interaction whatsoever. And as each one would come up to the microphone and read their poem, they would then step back when they finished and wait for their turn again. And I was standing there, and I was concentrated primarily on being of service to this person who had passed, to this person who had been so important to Robert, to this person who, from speaking from the perspective of a gay man, was part of my heritage in that respect. Somebody who didn't survive that plague, and I had the opportunity as someone who did survive that plague to honor him, even though I didn't know him, except through his poems, which were lovely and intimate. And the quality of the people who were reading the poems, they were very much walking up and just reading. I mean, I don't mean to be judgmental about that because it was nerve-wracking. We've never had any practice. And so I was really focused primarily on the words on the page and trying to get myself into an open channel to honor and serve these words. And as I was being that open channel, I could sense the energy in the room and the energy of the other performers, which was rather uneven and somewhat low. And as it was my turn and I walked into the spotlight and up to that microphone, the thing in me, the performer in me that had been latent for so long, opened up, and I could feel the energy of the audience. And I looked up, thankfully I was almost off book. I looked up and I said the first line to the audience, pulling from everything I knew about Roy. And I felt the audience receive that energy and send it back to me in such a forceful way that only an audience of 150 people can do. That it took my breath for just a moment. Thankfully, it worked in the poem. So theatrically, nothing was lost by that catch in my personal experience. I just remember catching it and it taking me so off guard that I had to fight like an animal not to just burst into tears and to focus back on the words and finish the poem. And as I would say each line, that cycle of energy, that the giving and the receiving, that connection was so strong and so immediate. And I thought, that's it. That's the thing that my friends feel, my sister feels when she goes to church and she does the call and response songs. Mm-hmm. It's that cycle of energy. It's the same thing. The context almost makes no difference, but it's that cycle of energy, that connection that is so essential for me. That is, that's the place where I will allow the term light worker to come into my own field of definition. Because
that's what it is.
That's it. I don't know that I changed the energy so much as I just tapped into what was there, both in front of me physically and from Roy and his words. But I'm grateful to have been of service.
But when we tap into energy like that, we do move the energy. So you may not have the intention consciously to move it, but the minute you tap into it and you become a part of it, you move it. I think actually that sort of comes along with something that Ty said earlier. And we have to remember that, is that one of the things that we are having a problem with, or we have a problem with, is that we talk very much about who we are different than what nature is. And we are not. Right? We are living organisms. We are the same matter as any tree, any bird, whatever. And nature has this separation, like humanity is one thing and nature is another, and we're not. So when we bear witness, right? Like people were bearing witness to your experience. And you, in fact, were bearing witness to them taking it all in, right? Everybody shifts each other's energy. I mean, that's really the whole thing. I think ceremony in some way is the concentrating of all that, right? Because look how different we feel. We walk down the street, we smile at each other, even if you don't know it. It's like, it's an uptick. The ceremony is just creating the statement that we're here.
Yeah.
And you felt so present in that moment.
I did, but it was
tell that story before, and your energy never changes each time you tell it. Whereas some stories we get excited about, and then over time it changes and it's not that exciting anymore, and we like move it. But I think I've heard that story 3 times. I don't think it's ever changed. It's as beautiful. It's as intense. It's again, actually, like we're witnessing it. It feels like that.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, it was an unexpected moment for me. I never expected to be standing on the stage in Dixon Place on a weeknight at 9 o'clock, speaking the words of a dead hooker and find God.
And find God, that's right. Or whatever it is you need to find, right? Right.
Yeah.
I feel like, Joey, I feel like you were holding space. Like you were totally holding space. You know, that's what holding space really is, at least to me.
Yeah.
And you were doing it in such a beautiful way, and for you to not even maybe be fully aware of that, but just, you know, hold that in such a divine, I feel like very sacred, because your intent was to honor the person's words and to bring forward that energy.
Well, it's interesting. Thank you for saying that, Graciela. I take the compliment there. Thank you. But it also occurs to me, Roy made his own space, and it wasn't until almost 20 years later that there was another space that was made for his space, right? So
Right.
just to sort of pivot back to your X-ray metaphor, Ty, it was that's what it was, a space within a space within a space.
Yeah, someone mentioned to me, what was it? There was some I think Buddhist guy named Thich Nhat Hanh. Have you heard of him?
You and those unknown people.
I want to know more.
Someone mentioned this guy. He said something about the interbeing. A friend of mine was like, Ty, it's like this thing called like the inside of interbeing, I guess. And I was thinking about what that meant. I was like, well, what do you think that, you know, he meant by this? And I was like, oh, you mean sort of like interconnectedness, you know, like being interconnected to one another, that everything is relying on everything else to bring light to that other thing.
That's
and
right.
so in hearing the story, I was like, wow, it's so powerful, because it's like in the spell of words of just even now, we are bearing witness to this like very special story. And however you're feeling in this moment with us on the virtual interwebs here, it was like those truth, it's so powerful that it, you know, palpable for the screen. It's just like very, I don't know, just something very honest about. And I want to also thank you for sharing, but that idea that everything is connected to something else, I think is so important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a story that I've told before, as Heather just said, and I'm always happy to tell it because it was I feel such gratitude. It's hard to say that word and not get moved. I feel such gratitude for being able to be the person who was in the middle between Roy, who had passed, and the audience who showed up that night.
Yeah.
I was the one who got to go, hey, y'all need to meet Roy. Roy, meet them.
I have this in my window. It's this stained glass. I don't know if you can kind of see it. It's this medicine wheel kind of thing. And a little kid like made it for me. And I was thinking about that as you were telling that story. I was looking out my window, and I was thinking about, you know, as we're talking about religions and things, the crossroads, they say that you're in the middle of this circle, this great design. And when you describe that story and all the things we're talking about, is that truth is crossing through you. And that's it makes these symbols so important. It's not even above or below or greater or more, but like it's just all around. It just is. I was like, it's pretty cool.
We are 10 minutes past time because I was so long-winded. I'm so sorry.
No,
Oh,
I'm just happy to see you all.
Whittled it down to 10 minutes. Not bad.
who's got anywhere to go? I mean, really.
I want to thank you all for being here. Yes, you too. I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for staying online with us for 10 minutes extra. I appreciate it. Hi, Karen. Hi, Ellen. Hi, Darren. Hi, Carol. So great to have you all here.
I got the most lovely email the other day from Darren, who was with us last week. So hello, Darren. Thank you so much.
That's great. And thank you, Ty, for making time for coming and talking to us.
Thank you, my love.
Thank you for having me. Anything. I'm like the Heather Joey show. I'm there for it. And Gracia, so nice to meet you.
Yes, nice to meet you. Thank you.
Yes.
Can't wait to play with you guys again.
I know. Stay tuned, and we'll let you know who's coming on next week. Because we're still doing this. It's a thing now. We've done 3. That makes a thing.
It's a thing.
It's a thing.
It's also, I'm going to be putting these all on my YouTube channel as well. So they're, oh, where are you going, Ty?
I'm leaving the pool. I'm going to the ocean.
Y'all gonna swim together? Where you going? Where you swimming?
Thank you all so much. Mwah.
Bye, guys. Thank you. Oh, and anybody out there, if you're still here, I know I said I would answer questions. So if you would like to email me, I can do a quick spirit writing and I will get you back your answers for sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather.
One question, everybody.
One.
Okay.
No compound sentences.
One comment. We have the editor here. We
That's
have
right.
the editing police. Bye, Joey.
Bye, love.
I'm going to go dry off.